these are the pieces for the ceiling detail that we're going to put around the lights. Now, they're a little bit different than everything that you've seen us do so far. And here's the reason why. I put a mitered cut on this end. So far, everything we've done has just been a butt joint, which is a very simple joint. It's a great strong joint. But anytime whether you're painting or staining wood, the end grain never quite turns out like the edge grain. So we always try to assemble our frames as much as possible to hide end grain. You know, either turn it down to the floor, you know, cover it up with another piece. Anyway, always just think about it. As much as possible when you're assembling a frame, try to hide the end grain from view. On this ceiling light detail we're doing, there's not really a way of doing that. So I'm going to assemble a miter joint instead of the square butt joint. So the critical part about this is I'm using the micro jig, and that lets me get two holes really close together. This material is 2.5 inches wide, which is about the narrowest you can do, and make this kind of joint. All I did was slide this board into the jig, and I just moved it over until it covered the drill guide bushings. As long as I can't see the hole in the drill guide bushings, then I'm going to be fine when I drill this. So I drill the holes on each end of these boards. Just like making a butt joint, you only put screws in 1/2 of the pieces that you're working with. Now, it's going to be really important to keep this clamped down tight and put glue in there, but I'm going to put this together and we'll see, but I think you're going to be pleased at just how easy it is to make a miter joint using these Kreg holes. You start working with these bigger frames, this type of detail, you do have to kind of plan ahead a little bit to figure out which way it's going to go together the best. I love the way that pulled the joint together. So with just a little bit of sanding, these miter joints are going to work out perfect. Now all I have to do is add 2 more cross pieces, which are actually straight butt joints, and that's going to divide this up because we're going to have 3 different can lights in this section. So I'm going to flip it back over, do the layout, and add those pieces. Now the thing that's going to make this light box even a little more interesting is we're going to actually use something other than just standard 1/4 inch plywood on the back side. We've got some of that beadboard looking plywood, so it's going to give it a very different look up on the ceiling. So I've got the whole frame put together now. My next step is going to be to rebate out the back to accept that beadboard plywood. So that's still using that same 3/8 rebating bit, just a little bit set shallower. The bearings still guide me on the inside of the frame, so it's a foolproof method. Now all I've got to do is go grab that piece of beadboard paneling and rip it down to size to fit these holes. This beadboard face on this piece of paneling is what's going to make our light detail so interesting, but it's also a little more challenging. I was just about ready to rip it to width when I realized I needed to turn it over and check, because when we put this piece of material in our frame, we want to see a reveal from each edge over to this bead detail. So I can't just cut it to the exact width I want. I have to do a little bit of planning to plan my cut. So I'm going to actually end up taking a little bit off each edge so that when we put the frame on here, these beads will be centered in the opening. Now, this material is also really slick, so I'm going to use a couple clamps to keep the material clamped down to my piece of rigid foam that's supporting the work. So this really turned out well. Now I went ahead and sanded the face first because I didn't want to get any extra sawdust on that beaded paneling that we're going to put in there. But I'm going to flip it over now and we'll staple and glue that bead paneling in from the back. Then we're going to be down to kind of the last step for this, which is kind of laying out and cutting holes for the can lights. Now we need to cut a 3 1/8 inch radius hole for each of the can lights. They're going to center up in here. One thing that I forgot to mention earlier is we did go check before we did this design in the kitchen ceiling and found out where the ceiling joists were, because we definitely didn't want to cut any ceiling joists. So if you know that your can is going to be about 6 inches wide, the center of any one of your can lights needs to be at least 3 inches away from a ceiling joist. Well, as you can see, the electrician was good to his word. He showed up right on time and did the pre-wiring so we could get this incredible frame and panel ceiling detail in place. I love changing it up a little bit with this beadboard. I think it makes such an incredible difference that we don't have that light box coming down on top of you. It makes the room seem so much bigger, and I think this just adds so much interest to the room. It's just another great example of all the incredible details that you can create with that one simple technique of frame and panel joinery with your Kreg jig.